In this video, we talk about SSS samples. First of all, SSS stands for subsurface scattering, and subsurface scattering simulates the effect of light entering an object and scattering beneath its surface. Not all the light reflects from a surface. Some of it will penetrate below the surface of an illuminated object. There it will be absorbed by the material and scattered internally. Some of the scattered light will make its way back out of the surface and become visible to the camera. This is known as subsurface scattering, or SSS, and it is necessary for the realistic rendering of materials such as marble, skin, leaves, wax, milk, plastic, fruits, plants, and so on. There are 4 components to simulate a realistic surface. We can take a look at an Arnold standard surface shader, for example. We have our base color or diffuse, specular reflections, transmissions or refractions, and finally SSS. A lot of people consider SSS as a secondary aspect of their shaders, which is a mistake because it is a primary component of a lot of shaders. We will talk about subsurface scattering and its effect on realism in the shading section of the course. I have this toy car model with an SSS material applied to. You can check out the shader that is assigned here, and SSS weight is set to 0.75 with a radius of 0.5 centimeters, and this is why we get this beautiful live shader on the car. And you can see how adding SSS to the shader immediately makes the shader touchable and realistic. Now let's open up the render settings. SSS samples control the number of direct and indirect samples to compute subsurface scattering around each shaded point. Higher SSS samples produce a cleaner subsurface scattering effect, but will take longer to render. Also, let's go to our AOVs and add SSS, SSS direct, and indirect AOVs to the active list so we can actually check them out in the IPR. I'm going to draw a render region around the car and set the SSS samples to 0 while the IPR is running. As we don't have any SSS samples, we see no SSS effect in the render, and all the SSS AOVs are empty as there is no SSS samples and therefore no data to show here. Let's get back to the beauty pass and increase the SSS samples to 1. Now we get a very noisy SSS effect as the sample values are very low, and if you check the SSS direct and indirect pass, you see how noisy they are as well. Don't forget that unlike the diffuse and specular samples up here, where they would just control indirect diffuse and specular rays, SSS sample controls both direct and indirect SSS rays. Now let's increase our SSS samples to around 6. And to get a clean SSS effect in your render, you need to have a fairly high number of SSS samples. And now we have a much cleaner SSS effect, and you can observe a much cleaner SSS direct and indirect passes as well. For the final render, I'm going to set my camera samples to 6, diffuse and specular samples to 4, and as we have increased our camera samples, we can decrease the SSS samples to get a faster render, but as the car toy is the main subject and occupies a lot of pixels, I'm going to leave it at around 6 to be safe. As we don't have any transmission shader in the scene, I don't care about transmission samples here. Now remember, we use ACES as our color manager, and if we render the scene directly to the picture viewer right now, you would see the render is completely messed up. And when working with ACES, you have to render it to EXR and then bring it back to sRGB in post. We will cover how to do that in the rendering section of the course, but for a fast JPEG or PNG save, you can take a snapshot and save the snapshot from the picture viewer to JPEG or PNG. But if you want an EXR render, just go to the render settings and change the format to EXR and start your render to the picture viewer. The render will look horrible in the picture viewer, but the saved EXR file will be absolutely correct and you can work with it in post. That's enough for this lesson. See you in the next one.